We're back for part 2 in our 3-part series with Dina Shale. Today we continue our conversation about all things trauma. Let's get into it.
Welcome to Happiness, Health and Relationships podcast. If you're looking for inspiration on powerful, healthy habits, you've come to the right place. I'm Angeline and I've been working with people for over 10 years in therapy. And this podcast will cut through the myths and misinformation on healthy lifestyle. I'll be interviewing experts in their field, providing top tips and motivation for 6 elements of living medicine. The 6 elements are reducing stress, exercise and fitness, nutrition, sleep, reducing addictive substances, and how to master healthy relationships. Let's get started.
And then you've got the freeze mechanism, which is where we become unresponsive, withdrawn, and sometimes disassociated. And, recognizing these parts of our nervous system that we use and how we've, created them as well from the past really helps us to identify how people can look at their lives differently. I know we've probably gone off on track a bit here, but it's still really interesting, I think.
So you've mentioned before that there's 3 different types of trauma, I think, or a few different types of trauma. So, can you speak a little bit about the 3 different types?
There's 3 main trauma types that we recognize. So there's acute trauma, and that stems from one event, highly stressful. It could be a dangerous event such as a natural disaster or a car accident or a sudden loss of a loved one. And it triggers an immediate and intense emotional reaction. So that's like a one-off thing. If, you have one big thing that happens and you're just not able to manage that situation, that's the acute trauma. And then we have the chronic trauma. So chronic trauma results from the repeated exposure to highly stressful events such as ongoing domestic abuse, long-term childhood abuse, or living in a war zone. And it can have an emotional and physiological changes to the body. So chronic trauma is probably what a lot of people out in the world are actually have had, and they just keep living through those same things. I think this is the one that long term that gives us the illness, because the sympathetic nervous system is in a highly charged state, and the cortisol and adrenaline isn't ever coming down into the ebb and flow of the nervous system. We're not able to bring calm into the nervous system. So that's what causes long-term illnesses.
And that sense of not being able to escape. I'm thinking
yes,
childhood abuse and
absolutely,
or a stressful work situation.
Absolutely. And also, we forget that this doesn't have to be a present thing. Some people go through a trauma and the wars and different, big disasters, they're not able, it's not like it goes away, that day. It might go on for weeks and years. But also there's the other, type of trauma that people experience where they're still living in it, and many people have experiences where it's been a huge trauma and they can't put that down and then move on. So what happens is the brain is thinking, I'm still in that trauma, and the body is responding, because your brain and the way you think sends the signals to your body for your body to respond in the same way it would when you're running away from the danger. And so some people that I've worked with over the past, and I'm sure there's many other people out there who've had these big traumas, these acute traumas, maybe a one-off. It might have lasted a long time, but then equally as well, they are still going through it in their head. And that can be ongoing as well. And also, not good for your nervous system and the whole function of your body, because it's never coming back down to the homeostasis level, which it needs for rest and digest.
Absolutely, yeah.
And this is one that we don't actually acknowledge very much either. And it's called a secondary trauma. Now, a secondary trauma occurs when someone is indirectly exposed to a trauma. They might not be having the trauma, but they actually witness it. And this is common amongst professionals like emergency responders and healthcare practitioners. And we forget that part. There are plenty of people out there that are going out and supporting, they're giving their love and their care to people in the community, and they might see them die, or they might see something happen within that period of time that they are working with the community. And that then it holds within the body, those emotions and feelings. And if you're not processing that and you think you can move on, then you can't. I've worked with lots of police officers actually that have had really big traumas and lots of small traumas, and then all of a sudden they have a big trauma, and that's it. Then their capacity to manage has gone.
Absolutely.
I'm just interrupting this episode just for a few short moments to let you know that I've got a page where you can leave me a voice message. I want to make these podcasts as interactive as possible, and wherever I can, include you, my brilliant listeners, into these episodes. So head over to speakpipe.com/Angeline and go ahead and leave me a message. It could be a question, it could be a review. You might even want to let me know what you'd like to hear on the upcoming episodes. Whatever it is, please drop me a message, and we might even include your message in upcoming episodes. I'll endeavour to answer all the questions, but I can't guarantee that I'll get to all of them, but I'll certainly give it a good go. Anyway, let's get back to it.
Okay, let's talk about trauma in the workplace, because this is really common, isn't it? And how the corporate culture can play into it, and how it relates in the workplace. And then we'll perhaps get into what employers can do in order to support employees as well. So tell us a bit more about how this shows up in the workplace and the impact.
Okay, so I suppose there's different levels that I'm thinking of here. So when we think about a corporate environment, you might think of like a hierarchy. So you might have your CEO at the top, and then then there's staff members, there's directors, and then below that there's other levels of employees beyond that, isn't there? Depending on how big the company is. But let's say it's a bit like maybe a CEO, and then you've got like one other sort of managerial person, and then you've got a number of other employees. So if we think about that hierarchy, what actually is really important in the workplace is that management structure that you have at the top of the hierarchy does have an understanding of emotional intelligence and emotional well-being when it's working with its workforce. But equally, these people at the top here really need to have done their own personal development and their own personal healing journey, and have an awareness of who they are, so that when they work and they ask their staff to flow down their hierarchy line, so staff CEO to manager, that they're not projecting onto their staff their own feelings and emotions. And also there's an element of transference as well. But what's really important is that CEO and the manager really are, when they're leading their staff, that they're leading from a place of emotional awareness and a trauma-informed leadership. And that creates like a supportive environment and a mindfulness environment as well. So, maybe that I know what it's like to have 10 staff, and when you've got your finger on lots of different things, and you're doing, you've got lots of balls in the air as you're doing HR, and you're doing a bit of a payroll, and you've got other things that you're doing, and your staff are actually doing the work underneath you. you need to be aware of what's happening in your own body. You need to be aware of where your nervous system is and whether you're acting out of being highly stressed in the moment or from the past. And also how to regulate your own nervous system, because your staff will feel the dysregulation in your nervous system in the same way that you would feel from your mother when your mother cradled you when you were a baby. So that dysregulation in the hierarchy really resonates through staff. And I'm sure we've all been in workplaces where, there's been a very dysregulated person maybe at the top, and the staff take on that emotion and feeling from those leaders, which then can lead to employee burnout, high turnover of staff because it's a very stressful environment to work in. And it's a very toxic type of environment as well, because there may be, an element of bullying, an element of projection of how they feel onto each other. And we also lose productivity in the work environment as well. And we can't grow unless our staff grow with us. So having an emotional awareness of where we are in our nervous system and how we're working with our clients and working with our staff really is for me is really important, that there is harmony within the workplace. And we all know what it's like to work for somebody who's really regulated, who's really calm and keeps the office nice and regulated, call it that again, but really calm in the workplace. It really resonates through the whole of the office to make you feel safe, doesn't it? But when that person is very highly charged, we might class them as ADHD, and they're flitting from one thing to another, it causes those ripple effects of emotion that then resonate within your body and cause you high levels of stress.
I'm just thinking about micromanagers. I'm thinking about anxious managers who, like you say, if they're not aware of their own, what's going on with themselves, to delegate and leave it with, the staff, they'll tend to micromanage. And like you say, that anxiety then seeps out into the team because they're so worried about getting the job done in a certain way. Perfectionists, if we've got a manager who's a perfectionist, then they're going to find it very difficult to put that trust in the team. And so that's what I was thinking there, that anxiety that's coming from the manager then gets filtered down the chain.
Yeah, absolutely. And that causes what's called incongruence as well. So if your manager or CEO talks about being calm, or if he said, I'm okay, I'm all right, I'm fine. And we see this a lot, don't we? When people say one thing, we call it a mask sometimes. And, they've got this, everything's okay, but you actually feel that everything is not okay. That's called incongruence, because they're not actually acting upon really the way they feel. They're actually lying about the way they feel. What can happen is we can sense that, and then we question our own awareness of whether we think we've got it right or not. You almost think, oh, you have to ask somebody else in the office, is that person okay, or is it me? I'm sure we've all asked that question. That person's not acting normally. Is it me, or have I got that right? They're the times when it's incongruent, when you think that you've asked your boss if he's okay, where he actually is highly stressed and he doesn't want you to know. And there's a lot of that, particularly with men, because of their ego.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that we pick up on people's energy sometimes, don't we? Where their words don't match their energy.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about managers who think that they're supposed to have it all together. They're supposed to be the ones that tell the team what to do. When actually we all, and like you say, we've worked in those environments where a manager will ask their team, well, what do you think about this? How would you play this one? And that way, that develops the individuals within the team. And you get to, the manager then can look for strengths in people and build on that, which we know, don't we, that if we work as a team in that way and actually, trust the members of the team by asking them how they would deal with a certain situation or get certain tasks done, then it's a far better way to manage, isn't it? Because we get, 5 heads are better than one, or however many are in the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when people as well don't want to work together, that would be an alarm bell to me, that there was something else going on within that dynamic. I mean, you see trauma when you know what to look for. You can see it a lot playing out into the workplace. People can project how they're feeling onto someone else. Somebody could have a big workload and they might say, "Oh, you're not managing your workload, are you?" Whatever the client's name is, or whatever the employee is called. That person that spoke to its other team member may project that onto that person, that they're feeling overwhelmed because of their workload, but they're trying to pinpoint it on someone else.
I was just thinking of that.
I've seen that quite a few times in the workplace, where people are projecting their thoughts and feelings, and also fears as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how to recognize how this shows up in the workplace. So what you're saying there is it shows up in relationships where for managers noticing what's going on with the employees, or and to be aware within themselves as well. Is somebody, do they get a bit irritable? Do they have an angry response sometimes? Do they go on the defensive? Do they worry about things? These are all the kind of the telltale signs, I guess, that they're being triggered in some way. I know that word is banded around now, but that's an indication, isn't it, of a small trauma potentially. They're being triggered in some way.
Yeah, and it could be, an emotion like fear that's coming up for them. There may be some fear in their relationship. It could be something maybe from the past that they see in that person. That's transference, where you see in somebody else something that resonates with you, or you recognize in somebody else. But equally, an emotion might come up for you where you don't feel worthy. We talked about that earlier as well. Feeling worthy in the workplace, but actually something somebody else said makes you feel like you're not worthy. And then all of a sudden you've got, a trauma response playing out in the workplace. And having people aware of what's actually happening in the dynamics of those relationships is really important, so that it can be dealt with effectively and quickly.
That's it for part 2 in our 3-part series with Dina Shale. Join us next week, where we continue the conversation about all things trauma and how it can show up in the workplace.